was born on a wind-slapped October night in the west wing of Hale Manor, the same sprawling estate where generations of Hale men learned to hide weakness behind cufflinks and coercion. She was not born a son. That alone was the first mark against her. Reginald Hale II, her father, stared at the swaddled newborn for precisely 7 seconds before passing her back to the nurse without a word. Her mother, Margaret, watched him leave the room, felt a flicker of hope gutter out behind her ribs, and turned her face to the window to hide her tears from the staff. As a child, Cassandra learned the family's real language early, a code of glances across boardroom tables, the sharp silence that fell when her father's voice lowered. She learned to read contracts by stealing ledgers from his office after midnight. She learned to bluff by watching her mother lie to reporters about charity auctions that funneled funds back into Reginald's private deals. The servants called her Little Ghost. She drifted through corridors uninvited, small and watchful, absorbing adult sins like secondhand smoke. She understood profit margins by 10, corporate leverage by 12, and how a well-timed rumor could topple a rival oil baron before she'd ever kissed a boy. The small defiance, her first open rebellion, came at 15. Reginald was hosting an emergency board dinner to soothe angry investors after a pipeline rupture in Angola. Cassandra, legs swinging under the polished mahogany, corrected a director's misstatement about the break-even cost of the repairs, calmly quoting figures she wasn't meant to know. The room froze. Reginald's hand clenched around his glass so hard the stem snapped. She remembered thinking he'd finally see her brilliance. Instead, he called for the maid to escort her out, voice like frost. That night, he stormed into her bedroom, ripped down the financial charts she'd pinned behind her wardrobe, and locked her computer in his safe. Margaret pleaded for him to relent. He did, on one condition. Cassandra would be shipped to an elite boarding school in Switzerland. Far enough to forget ambition, close enough to remind her who paid the bills. She lasted 8 months before vanishing from campus, leaving behind only a single note: "I am not your pawn. Watch me." Vanished into the world. No one in the family knew where she went. Officially, Cassandra Hale was an embarrassment. Privately, her father spent millions on private investigators who returned only blurry photos of a young woman boarding cargo planes in dusty airfields, or standing beside aging kingpins in Southeast Asian ports. At 19, Cassandra slept on the floor of a hacker's squat in Bangkok, learning digital shell games that could bankrupt a subsidiary overnight, knowledge she banked for later. At 21, she drank vodka with Georgian mobsters who taught her which offshore havens asked the fewest questions. She lost money. She survived betrayals. She learned how to disappear deeper. In those lean years, eating instant noodles in borrowed apartments, she dreamed not of revenge, but of taking back what should have always been hers. Building the Shadow Empire. The real empire began in Talon. She bought an algorithm that mapped global commodity flows in real time, a prototype its developer was too broke to finish. Cassandra funded him, protected him from old debt sharks, and when it was ready, she owned it outright. With that, she saw how her father's house of cards bled cash to pay hush money for outdated rigs and failing pipelines. She knew exactly where to cut first. Under aliases, she set up acquisition firms in neutral jurisdictions. She made friends with rival oil families who hated Reginald more than they distrusted an anonymous investor with liquid capital. She stayed invisible. Her father's men sniffed rumors of a new green hedge fund swallowing up Hale debt. They never traced it back to the daughter they'd exiled. Gathering the betrayers, Cassandra learned that dynasties don't crumble from swords. They rot from inside. She found the cracks. A cousin addicted to online gambling, his trust fund leveraged against a 2% voting stake. An uncle covering up an embezzlement scandal that would land him in prison. Bored lawyers who pocketed hush fees for decades, now ripe to flip for a taste of her future. She promised them protection, freedom, money. She lied when needed. Loyalty, she knew, was just another contract. By 35, Cassandra owned a controlling web, pieces of subsidiaries, critical debt blocks, and quiet ties to the creditors who held her father's throat without knowing it. The week of the storm, it culminated in 1 week. News leaks, rumors of buyouts, a stock dip that set old guard directors panicking. Cassandra's agents called the final creditors, buying remaining shares at a premium. Reginald could not match without bankrupting his personal accounts. She watched from a suite overlooking Singapore's Marina Bay, her private war room humming with encrypted calls, deal terms whispered in Mandarin and French and Russian. When her lawyer, Martin, called with the last confirmation, Cassandra walked to the window, pressed her palm to the glass, and whispered to her reflection, "Tomorrow, you go home." Walking into the den. On Tuesday, Reginald Hale II summoned his family and key stakeholders to the top-floor boardroom. He paced, raging that shadow investors threatened his legacy. Mid-rant, the door opened. Cassandra walked in, black suit tailored razor-sharp, hair pinned back like a crown of thorns. The room stilled. Her mother gasped her name. Reginald's words died, disbelief and rage fighting for purchase in his bloodshot eyes. Without flinching, Cassandra placed her phone on the table. One tap, and the room's screens displayed her stake, 52.4% controlling interest, verified by the same lawyers Reginald had trusted all his life. "You?" he croaked. She smiled softly. "Me." The boardroom war. What followed was chaos in suits. Her brothers shouted threats. Her father accused her of betrayal, disloyalty, madness. Cassandra countered every accusation with calm facts, slide after slide of forensic audits showing the mismanagement they'd hidden for decades. "You let this family stagnate," she said, voice cutting through the din like piano wire. "I built a machine that can survive what you broke." One by one, the holdouts realized the truth. Without her, they had nothing. No pipeline funding, no legal shield from mounting environmental suits, no leverage. By dusk, half the old board had signed over full operational control. The rest stormed out into the hallway, trailed by flustered aides. Reginald was last. He stood behind his father's old chair, trembling with a fury that no longer had teeth. "You think you won," he spat. "You will ruin what you claim to save." Cassandra rose, face inches from his. "No, father, I am what saves it." Rebuilding the crown. In the months that followed, Cassandra dismantled the old empire piece by piece. She sold aging rigs, invested in wind corridors across northern Europe, secured partnerships with tech giants that once mocked the Hale name as fossil fuel relics. Some old allies turned enemies. A few tried to sabotage her in the press, leaks about her shadow years, accusations of blackmail. She countered with calm admissions and surgical counterleaks of her own. She held her mother close for the first time in decades. Margaret, half broken by years of polite captivity, whispered once, "You did what I never could." Cassandra squeezed her hand. "You gave me enough rope to climb out." One the final reflection. 1 year later, Cassandra Hale stood in the old private library of Hale Manor, the room where she'd hidden to read union manuals and oil reports by flashlight. The same shelves, the same smell of dust and expensive neglect. On the desk, a single folder, the final closure of the last hostile suit against her reign. She traced her fingers over it, then looked to the fireplace mirror, no longer seeing the girl once slapped for speaking too boldly. She saw the ruler, the survivor, the legacy reborn in her image, flaws and all. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. Inside, Cassandra Hale, the unwanted daughter, the patient conqueror, smiled. She whispered to the dark, "Never again." Ghosts of the exile years. After the first blaze of freedom, the stolen cash, the overnight flight east, Cassandra discovered that exile is not a fairy tale of rebellion. It is hunger. It is the taste of cheap soap in hostile bathrooms. It is bribing border guards with jewelry filched from her mother's drawer. In Odessa, she slept on a rusting cargo barge, trading fake port permits to smugglers in exchange for scraps of knowledge. How to forge an invoice believable enough to move millions across a gray bank. In Nairobi, she slept in the back of a war journalist's van, hacking oil reports on a stolen laptop with a cracked screen. Once alone in a Moscow winter, she nearly froze under a bridge after a deal went bad and her handler turned on her. She woke in a shelter, hands trembling so violently she spilled the tea an old nun gave her. That night, she carved her first alias into a database, a new Cassandra on paper, the old one dead. Each near death taught her the lesson her father's money never could. Fear nothing you can outthink. Allies and betrayals. In her third year abroad, Cassandra met Abel Duarte, a banker turned whistleblower with a taste for ruin. He found her at a shipping auction in Manila, where she bluffed a rival into surrendering half his cargo routes for pennies. Abel laughed as she signed the contract. "You're dangerous," he told her over whiskey, staring at her like a man glimpsing a ghost. A Hale daughter playing pirate. She trusted him more than she should have. Together they spun accounts that funneled tiny flecks of oil profit through 10 jurisdictions. Together they carved away slivers of Hale equity, so small her father's CFO never saw the hemorrhage. Abel betrayed her eventually, selling a list of her shell companies to a French conglomerate, hoping to ransom her plan back to Reginald. Cassandra paid for that mistake with a bullet that grazed her ribs as she fled a hotel in Marseille. She never spoke Abel's name again, but she never stopped using what he taught her. The second family years later, on a balcony in Jakarta, Cassandra realized she had built a second family. They had no crest, no manor house. They had burner phones and hand signals and trust bought in wired blood money. There was Hana, a data broker from Seoul who never smiled but once flew 4,000 miles on a forged passport to warn Cassandra about an Interpol raid. There was Taufik, an Indonesian cybercriminal turned loyal fixer who taught her how to make a server farm vanish behind religious charities. They called her boss behind her back, half in fear, half in awe. In quiet moments, when whiskey burned her throat, Cassandra felt a pang. This motley crew had given her more love than the people whose names she still carried. Reginald's desperation. While Cassandra built her network, Reginald Hale's empire bled. Oil prices dipped, then plunged. Lawsuits sprouted like mold. Environmental fines he once paid with hush bribes now came with reporters attached. Desperate, he leveraged more and more to keep the facade gleaming. A new refinery project in West Africa that siphoned capital from safe rigs. A showy acquisition of a dying competitor that impressed the press but shredded quarterly returns. Behind closed doors, Reginald blamed everyone but himself. His sons whispered about removing him. His wife drank alone in garden courtyards. None of them noticed the pattern in who bought their debts. Cassandra's proxies, cloaked in layers of plausible deniability. The pre-takeover feint. 1 year before the final strike, Cassandra tested her grip. She orchestrated a failed hostile bid on a Hale pipeline arm, leaking rumors to the press. Reginald dismissed it publicly, crowing about his iron grasp. Privately, the lenders panicked. Cassandra watched the share price wobble, calculated exactly how little pressure it took to crack the board's confidence. She pulled back just in time to watch her father scramble to patch the hole she'd poked. That night, in a safe house in Zurich, Cassandra sat alone with the financial printouts. She allowed herself a smile, the same half-smile Reginald once hated. It was almost time. The night before the end, on the eve of the final takeover, Cassandra walked the London riverfront under a black umbrella. The rain blurred the city lights into streaks that reminded her of childhood tears she no longer remembered shedding. She wondered if her mother would stand with her or cower beside Reginald when the doors swung open. She wondered if her brothers would curse her forever or quietly thank her when the dust settled and the company survived under her hand. She wondered faintly if the little girl inside her, the one who once traced oil maps in secret, would recognize the woman she had become. She whispered to the Thames, "Tomorrow, you come home." The takeover, in full. The boardroom smelled like sweat and stale coffee before she arrived. Reginald was barking orders into his phone, voice ragged with sleepless terror. Her brothers bickered in harsh whispers about votes they'd promised but lost. When the double doors cracked open and Cassandra stepped inside, the room fell silent like a stage at the final act. She didn't bother sitting. She stood at the head, a hand resting lightly on her mother's old gold pen, the same pen Reginald once used to sign oil rights treaties. Today, it signed him into history. Reginald lunged for bluster first. Threats, insults, bribes. Cassandra spoke over him with lethal calm, presenting slide after slide. Not just shares, but forensic evidence of mismanaged billions, offshore fraud, and hush funds that would sink the company if she chose to leak them. "Your way is extinction," she said softly as her father sagged into his chair, defeated. "My way is the future. You taught me how to fight. You never taught me how to lose." When security escorted him out, he did not look back. The kingdom remade. Months of scorched earth transformation followed. Cassandra fired whole divisions of loyalists, replaced aging oil contracts with renewable expansions, forced new technology onto managers who still muttered about the good old days. Investors called her reckless until the profits returned. Then they called her genius. Not every betrayal ended clean. A cousin tried to leak blackmail videos to the press. She buried him under countersuits so brutal his lawyers abandoned him mid-case. A former friend tried to siphon money offshore. She let him run, then snatched back twice what he stole, plus interest. At night, when the towers glittered and the board meetings quieted, Cassandra sometimes caught her reflection in the glass. For a heartbeat, she almost missed the young rebel who once studied sabotage in dingy hostels. Then she remembered the price of weakness. The quiet vindication. 1 year after the storm, Cassandra Hale returned alone to Hale Manor. She stood in her father's old office, untouched since his forced retirement. On his desk lay a single object, the portrait of her as a child hidden behind stacks of old bond certificates. He had kept it, buried under greed and ego. She sat in his chair, spun it once, and laughed. A sound she hadn't let herself taste in years. In the mirror she saw no ghost, only herself, the rightful heir, the unstoppable storm.